Our next talk is by Leslie Aiello. She's of the Venner Gren Foundation in Chicago, and her talk is entitled Bipedalism and the Evolution of the Genus Homo.
What I want to do is take you back to the mid-1960s and to this particular bone. Now, this is a toe bone. It's your big toe bone. And what's very interesting about this is what you can tell about the fossils and about the capabilities of the fossils from very small bits of material. Now, this is Olduvai hominid 10. It was found in 1961 by Lewis and Mary Leakey at Olduvai. And it comes from the upper part of bed 1, so it's slightly more recent than 2 million years. And what's interesting about this bone, you can tell from this bone that whoever owned that bone had a bipedal form of locomotion that was very similar to our own. Now remember, this is 1.9, 1.8 million years ago. And the reason that you can tell this was pointed out by Michael Day and John Napier, two of the leading early formative comparative anatomists in the field of human bipedal locomotion. And what they simply pointed out is that this toe bone had a little twist on it. Now, if you compare the lateral torsion on the toe bone, and you have two human populations here, you have chimpanzees and gorillas here, you have Olduvai hominid 10, the Homo bone, right here within the human range of variation. Now, what this tells you is that, again, whoever owned this bone was walking in a very similar fashion to ourselves. We have the differences between the human and ape foot, and we have the force transfer through the human foot, where we hit on the heel, roll over to the lateral side of the foot, roll onto the ball of the foot, and twist off with the big toe. It's something very, very different from what we see in the chimpanzees. And again, is a very important factor here. You have the chimpanzee foot coming up with the mid-tarsal break and then rolling over as the force rolls through the foot. In the human foot, the foot acts like a solid lever. And this is because of the structure, of course, of the lateral side of the foot. This Olduvai hominid 10, this toe bone, was published 2 years after Leakey, Tobias, and Napier published Homo habilis. And Homo habilis, part of the paratype, was the Olduvai hominid foot. And what was happening at that particular time, our idea of human evolution was very, very much different. At the time that Leakey, Tobias, and Napier published Homo habilis, we knew of the robust Australopithecines from South Africa, Australopithecus africanus from South Africa, and Lewis and Mary had just discovered Paranthropus boisei or Zinjanthropus boisei. The picture from the Illustrated London News, when it was first discovered, they actually thought Zinjanthropus was on the straight line to Homo. And of course, this changed very rapidly as soon as the Homo habilis fossils were discovered. But at this time, if we move back to the late 1960s, early 1970s, our idea about what was going on in relation to human evolution and relation to the evolution of bipedal locomotion was very, very different than what we have today. No one's yet mentioned Ramapithecus. When I was a student in the 1960s, Ramapithecus was the first hominid, dated about 14 million years ago. And even though there were no fossils in between, it was a straight line from Ramapithecus all the way up to Homo sapiens. And what was interesting about it is they reconstructed this bipedal image of Ramapithecus from that amount of fossils. And if you sort of followed the line of argument, Ramapithecus was supposed to have a small canine tooth. Because it had a small canine tooth, it couldn't protect itself, so it would have had to have used stone tools. And if it used stone tools, it would have had to have walked upright to use those stone tools. And so, you know, from that amount of fossils, you get that reconstruction. But also note that the reconstruction has an opposable toe. And this comes from work that goes way back into the 30s. because before the 1960s, there was very, very little known about the postcranial skeleton of any of the fossil hominids. And a lot of our ideas about the evolution of bipedalism came from comparative anatomy. And the main theory was proposed by Dudley Morton in the mid-1930s, and you went from a chimpanzee-type, very mobile foot to a gorilloid foot, and we've into a fully modern human foot. And what Louis Leakey was doing was desperately trying to position Homo habilis as the first member of our genus Homo. You can see in this chart that even it's called Australopithecus habilis here. And this came from a very well-known textbook at the time, David Pilbeam's Ascent of Man. Louis Leakey was busily trying to convince us that these rather scrappy skull bones had a very large cranial capacity, that the dentition was very much more human-like than you had in the Australopithecines, and the hand bones had the manipulative ability that would be suitable for tool use. The Olduvai hominidate foot was part of this. And what he was stressing at that time was the very strong first metatarsal that would indicate that weight transfer as you were pushing off, but also very robust lateral metatarsals, and that you had the locking mechanism between the cuboid and your calcaneus here that would lock your foot into that lever that allowed you to push off in a very efficient locomotion. Now, if you do a analysis of some of the tarsal bones, you find that the Olduvai hominid foot isn't fully modern. And the reason for this is the morphology of the talus here and leading into the navicular on the medial side of the foot. When Napier and Davis were publishing this, they actually commented on it, but they emphasized this very human mobility of this foot because they were very interested in establishing Homo habilis as the earliest member of our genus. And in later years, Michael Day, who was my PhD advisor, actually said that they probably overstressed the human motion in this foot because of the fact that they were trying to establish this as Homo. Now, what I found quite interesting, the fossils from the site of Dmanisi, Homo georgicus or early Homo erectus, dating about 1.7 to 1.8 million years, the earliest hominids out of Africa. The foot bones that we have for the Dmanisi material aren't identical to modern human feet. This is work that was recently published by Herman Ponzer and the rest of the Dmanisi team. And here you have the Dmanisi foot. And again, remember, as you roll your weight around, push off on your big toe. That first metatarsal is very robust. In humans, it has a very expanded head to it, reflecting that force that you push off with. Chimpanzees have a very small head. Some of the Australopithecines that we have the first metatarsals for, again, relatively gracile heads. The Dmanisi fossils also have extremely gracile heads. What really excited me about this paper was actually this diagram. Because here you have a modern foot, and you have the line of force going along the first metatarsal. The Dmanisi foot is reconstructed with the line of force going between the first metatarsal and the second metatarsal. Now, there's a very interesting structural reason for this, and this is the torsion in your tibia. Because in a modern Homo sapiens, we have a lateral torsion in the tibia that automatically places our feet with an outward direction. And what's fascinating about the Dmanisi material is the tibial torsion is less. So the foot doesn't point out as laterally as much as it does in humans. And that this is more than likely responsible for the relatively gracile first metatarsal. In other words, they're transmitting the force over the foot in a different fashion than we would. Now, we don't understand why this is so, but what it tells us is that something's going on here. And even when you get into this early Homo erectus stage, where you have assumingly a body form that's much more similar to ourselves than to the earlier Australopithecines. There's something very different going on in the mechanics of walking. Also, we should notice here is the difference in the talus. Earlier on today, we were talking about variations in the form of the trochila. And there's a very strong difference between Homo habilis and the Dmanisi material, having a very much more modern shape of the talus. Now, we actually should have known this because Bernard Wood, who's sitting somewhere in the back, in 1974, published a multivariate analysis showing that the Olduvai is not similar to modern humans, but it's actually much more similar to the only talus we knew at that time that belonged to a robust Australopithecine from South Africa. Now, of course, things are very different now in terms of our ideas of human evolution in comparison to where they were 40 years ago. It's been pointed out we now have 22 or 23 species, depending how you count. One of the interesting things also is the Ramapithecus here is now no longer directly related to the hominid line. Okay, what I mentioned so far, Dmanisi, early Homo erectus. ER813 is a Homo-type talus coming from Cobifora. You have Olduvai hominidate, the Homo habilis, and you have the robust Australopithecine. And depending how you classify them, you lump all of these into Homo, or, as some have suggested, the Olduvai hominid talus is Australopithecus robustus, or a robust Australopithecine. It's been misclassified. These all come from this very interesting time period of around 1.8 to 2 million years ago. Now, we have Australopithecus sediba. With sediba, you have this very interesting foot, where again the talus is quite human-like. We've heard about the pelvis that's extremely human-like, but also about the heel bone, the calcaneus, that's almost ape-like in its anatomy. And you have a very mobile subtalar joint. Now, something's different is going on here. And what the question is how many different forms of bipedalism do you have leading up to this period at 2 million years ago? And also, in terms of evolution, is sediba actually an ancestor of the hominid line? Or are they 2 parallel, 3 parallel lines? In terms of how many alternatives to ourselves do we have existing in this particular time period? In terms of a fairly modern morphology of the foot, we can take it back to about 2.3 million years with more material coming from the Omo, which is just north of Cobifora. You have a very modern talus, and very importantly, you have a very modern calcaneus. But if you move back from this, things become very, very sparse. We've heard about Australopithecus afarensis and having a number of different foot bones, and the attempts of people to reconstruct this into a composite foot. The only other reasonably complete foot we have is the Littlefoot specimen from Member 2 at Sterkfontein. And I put a very long time span in here because you've had dates anywhere from 4 million all the way up to about 2.2 million years for the Littlefoot specimen. We really don't have any idea where it goes, but it's probably somewhere in this 3 to perhaps a little bit more recent time period. What I was able to do with one of my PhD students, Will Harcourt-Smith, a few years ago, is actually analyze the Littlefoot material. And we used 3D morphometrics on it. And we're able to compare some of the tarsal bones with Littlefoot to the Hadar composite material and to Olduvai hominid 10. And when you look at the analysis, the meta-analysis of these bones, it's not too exciting. They're all right there in the middle between the African apes, humans. Here are the orangutans. But if you do an exact randomization or comparative analysis, some very interesting results popped out of this. The yellow histogram here is comparing the interspecific comparison, so comparing every modern human to every modern human, every chimpanzee to every modern every other chimpanzee. It gives you what the interspecific range of variation is. The blue is when you compare different species. And the Olduvai foot is very similar to Littlefoot. So Littlefoot was found at Sterkfontein. It's in deposits slightly older than Australopithecus africanus found at Sterkfontein. If you compare Olduvai hominidate to the Afarensis material, or if you compare Littlefoot to the Afarensis material, they're so different from each other. They couldn't have come, based on the range of variation we know in living species, from the same species, and by inference, the same locomotor pattern. So at least between these 3 feet that we have, some degree of associated material with, we seem to have at least 2 different patterns and possibly 3 different patterns. Now, another very interesting thing with this is when Littlefoot was first published, it was published with the opposable toe, which actually is a very similar, almost identical diagram to Dudley Morton's middle evolutionary stage in the hypothetical evolution of the foot. When we went and looked at the middle cuneiform, the Littlefoot SCW 571 actually had no indication of opposability in it. But the Hadar specimen, the Australopithecus afarensis, did seem to have an indication, if any of this material, that it did have a slighter degree of opposability than you would find in the other foot specimens. So if we come back to summarize this, what we seem to have is the Littlefoot specimen coming from somewhere in this region, having a quite close correspondence with the Olduvai foot. The talus has strong degrees of similarity, the navicular, and into the middle cuneiform. The odd one out is the Africanus composite foot. So the question is, do we actually have 2 and possibly 3 different patterns of bipedalism coming up through this time period where we have so many species of hominids where we don't have associated skeletal material and where we actually don't know what the relationships between one and another are? The other foot that we have, of course, is Ardipithecus. And this is much older, coming from about 4.4 million years ago. And earlier today, it's been pointed out that it has this very remarkable grasping foot. When Ardipithecus was published, it was argued that this completely changed our interpretation of the evolution of the human line. That no longer did we have a chimp-like ancestor, but chimps were specialized as well as the other African apes. And what the core basal type of hominid would be Ardipithecus, with this very strange anatomy, this very big, very robust grasping toe. And of course, this would overturn the old Dudley Morton idea of chimp-like to a more grilloid to a more human type of foot. Now, before you get too excited about this, remember what happened to Ramapithecus. That it was sort of exiled from being a hominid ancestor. Look at the evolutionary tree here. This is the group of fossils we've been talking about. Australopithecus, early Homo. This corresponds to this part of the evolutionary tree. The older specimens here are over here. And look at the range of other Miocene apes and other fossils we have. I mean, it's a very crowded geography here. Here we have Ardipithecus. Do you know what Oreopithecus bamboli is? Look how far this is in terms of the evolutionary distance from the hominids. Oreopithecus was one of the most complete skeletons when I was a student in the 1960s. It's a beautiful specimen. And this is the reconstruction that was done of Oreopithecus. Notice the bipedality. Notice the similarity with Ardipithecus. In fact, they could actually be sisters in terms of the way they're drawn here. And what's very interesting about this is the Oreopithecus foot is extremely similar to the Ardipithecus foot. What's going on? If Ardipithecus is changing our idea about the evolution of locomotion, was Oreopithecus a parallel evolutionary development? We actually don't know. And this, I think, is one of the most important comparisons that has to be made in terms of informing our idea about the evolution of bipedalism, is what is Aureopithecus doing there that seems to be so similar to this new and exciting specimen that's being called one of the earliest representatives of the human line. So in summary then, there's a number of extremely important questions. What's this difference between RD and Aureopithecus? What's Australopithecus sediba telling us about the number of and variety of bipedalism we have going on at this time? And one of the things that I'm extremely interested in that just disappeared was what's happening post-Homo erectus, and when did we actually get a postcranial skeleton, bipedal locomotion that we would recognize as identical to ourselves. Now, one question that we haven't addressed at all in this conference is, why did bipedalism evolve in the first place? You know, why are we standing on two legs? Because it is a huge change in our anatomy. So please come up forward with some questions at the end. Thank you very much.